Rent is on the rise in cities across the country.
Tonight, skyrocketing rents forcing a growing number of Americans to think twice about where home is.
It's been making news for months. Rent is up. Rental prices increasing more than 30% in major cities across the U.S. There's a handful of reasons for the surge, but experts say one in particular is key: private equity firms.
The predatory behavior by private equity firms and their business ventures in the housing market is something that we care deeply about. We've been covering it on this show sporadically, but we finally have some positive news out of the state of California, because California's prosecutors report that private equity-backed Invitation Homes, which serves as the largest landlord of single-family home rentals, will now be forced to pay millions of dollars in civil penalties and restitution after it was found to have engaged in illegal rent gouging. How often do we report stories like this? Not often, especially out of places like California. But I have to say, this is an example of progressive policies really working to protect ordinary people, especially when it comes to something as important as housing. Now, this settlement would still need to be approved by a judge, but I don't see any reason why a judge wouldn't approve it. Now, according to Attorney General Rob Bonta, the nation's largest landlord of single-family home rentals will pay $3.7 million in civil penalties and restitution to resolve allegations that it violated California laws against rent gouging. Okay, so let's pause and just give California and its state legislature a round of applause for passing legislation to ensure that sudden rent hikes that make housing unaffordable are essentially outlawed. Now, this is different from rent control. In the state, there are rent controlled units, and the landlords of those units can increase rent about 1.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But when it comes to other rental units, California wanted to ensure that there was some protection for them as well. Now, it's great to see a tiny bit of justice for ordinary Americans and renters who do tend to fall prey to corporate interests, in this case, corporate investors in residential real estate. But before we get to the specific case in California and how California's Attorney General Rob Bonta pursued Invitation Homes with legal action, I do think it's important to remember the fine folks behind this insidious and, in my opinion, predatory business venture. So what is Invitation Homes? Well, private equity is all over this venture. It all started off as an apartment investment company known as Treehouse Group in Arizona back in 2006. Now, at that time, the company had bought up about 1,000 foreclosed homes following the 2008 economic crash. The way that we responded to that economic crash was absolutely disastrous to Americans, because it really did give institutional investors and banks a leg up in snatching up all the homes in our market. And that's kind of led to the housing crisis that we're experiencing today. But that company was later, Treehouse, it was later merged with the Dallas-based property management firm Riverstone Residential. Then the company's business model got a massive boost from private investors because the company was acquired by Blackstone, the private equity company, in the spring of 2012, which ended up forming Invitation Homes, okay? With Blackstone, again, giving Treehouse and Residential more capital to basically expand the business. Then in November of 2019, Blackstone divested its share of Invitation Homes, but almost immediately in October of 2020, Invitation Homes created a joint venture with another private equity firm known as Rockpoint Group to purchase $1 billion in single family homes in Dallas, Seattle, South Florida, and other US markets. In some cases, they will literally build neighborhoods with the intention of buying up every home in that neighborhood and making them rental units. Now, Invitation Homes operates 85,000 properties across the country. It's 12,000 homes in California accounted for 17% of the company's $614 million in rental revenue during the 3 months that ended September 30th, according to its most recent quarterly FEC financial report. It's important to keep in mind when you put it in the context of a $3.7 million settlement. But nonetheless, here's some more information about that. The $2,982 average monthly rent for Invitation Home properties in Southern California is actually the highest in its nationwide portfolio. So they charge a lot more for rent in California. And so as all of this activity was going on, luckily there were state lawmakers who caught on to it, caught on to how damaging it can be for ordinary people, especially when it comes to housing affordability, and they took some action. But aside from jacking up rent, these private equity-backed companies, corporate landlords, if you will, tend to treat their tenants poorly as well. Here's an example.
After Carlos and Ebony January say the landlord did a shoddy job of repairing an upstairs leak.
We just like to be alive.
In Broward County, Florida, the parents of Brielle Nicholson say in a lawsuit their daughter's asthma was caused by the very same landlord who failed to remove toxic mold from their rental home.
Every morning and every night, she has to take a breathing treatment.
We just feel like we've been victimized and taken advantage of.
Tenants also told us the company is quick to threaten eviction, even if a tenant is only a few days late with the rent. When it happens, they can end up in court and have to pay additional fees and the company's lawyers to stave off eviction. Is that true? They have to pay those fees?
Yes, it's true.
Disastrous. Now, luckily, there is some protection for renters in the state of California. So let's get to what prosecutors in California did and how it led to a potential $3.7 million penalty. So between October of 2019 and December of 2022, Invitation Homes, which owns 12,000 properties in California, increased rents for 1,900 tenants above the allowable amounts per state laws, and that's according to Bonta's office. The laws limit annual rent increases to 5% plus a regionally adjusted inflation figure and to no more than 10%. So in the best case scenario for these institutional investors, they can jack up rent up to 10% in the state of California, but no more than that. Now, shockingly, the legislation that I was referring to was signed by Gavin Newsom. I say shockingly because he's been an awful governor in so many different ways, but he made the right move here by signing this legislation into law. And the law that Newsom signed in 2019 states that California's rent cap law has basically been limited to what I had just described, a max of 10% in some parts of California. And the law is in fact one of the strictest limits on rent increases in the country. It applies to all multifamily rental housing except for apartments built within the last 15 years. And the law also covers single family home rentals operated by corporations or institutional investors, such as Invitation Homes. And so currently under the law, landlords are allowed to increase rents by no more than 8.8% in Los Angeles and Orange counties, 9.2% in the Bay Area, and varying figures elsewhere in California. It affects properties built before 2008. And as a result of state prosecutors deciding to go after this corporate landlord, Invitation Homes, well, they will pay $2.04 million in penalties. The company is spending an additional $1.68 million to refund or credit tenants the amount it collected in excess of the state's rent cap plus 5% interest. And besides the 2019 rent cap law, Bonta's office alleged Invitation Homes violated separate laws that prohibit annual rent increases larger than 10% in local and statewide emergency periods, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so he actually took action on behalf of ordinary people who tend to fall prey to corporate interests like this. And I'm really happy to report it. I'm not someone who just wants to trash what's going on in California for the fun of it. I live here and I like to see our state lawmakers and our state prosecutors work on behalf of ordinary Americans. This is a perfect example of that. But in order for prosecutors to be empowered to go after that kind of predatory behavior, you need to have laws on the books indicating that the tenants are protected from sudden massive rent hikes. And unfortunately, many states in the US do not have those protections. I think a good example of that is the state of Florida. There are very few restrictions in regard to what landlords can do in raising the rent. And I personally know people living in the state who had to move out of their apartments because their landlord hit them up and let them know, hey, I'm gonna jack up your rent by another $500 a month. That is not tenable. It's untenable for a lot of Americans. And so having this protection in place is incredibly, incredibly important.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.